Get him out of here. The words cracked across the hospital lobby so sharply that conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the soft hum of the information desk seemed to fade for a moment. Malik Carter stood perfectly still beneath the bright white lights, a toolbox hanging loosely from one hand. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked toward the woman who had just said it. Claire Bennett stood near the reception desk, her tailored navy blazer immaculate, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. At 32, she was the youngest executive director in the history of St. Andrew Medical Center, and everyone in the building knew it. Nurses respected her. Administrators feared disappointing her. Board members praised her. And right now, every pair of eyes in the lobby was fixed on the man she had ordered removed. Two security officers approached carefully. Neither seemed comfortable. They knew Malik. Everyone knew Malik. For nearly 6 years, he had been part of the hospital's maintenance department. If a family member needed directions, Malik helped. If an elderly visitor looked lost, Malik walked them to their destination. If a waiting room television stopped working or a wheelchair needed adjustment, somehow Malik always appeared before anyone called him. But today was different. Today whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Today a patient had died. Today rumors filled every hallway. And somehow Malik Carter had become the center of them. The security officers stopped beside him. One cleared his throat. "Malik," he began quietly. Malik gave a small nod before the man could finish. "It's okay," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. That somehow made the moment worse. Across the lobby, Claire folded her arms. Her jaw remained tight. The investigation had barely started, but pressure had arrived immediately. Reporters were calling. Lawyers were asking questions. Donors were demanding answers. Someone had to be held accountable. Someone had to take responsibility. And every piece of preliminary information pointed toward a maintenance failure inside a restricted wing of the hospital. A maintenance failure connected to Malik's department. Rain tapped softly against the massive glass entrance behind him. Gray afternoon lights spilled across the polished floor, turning the lobby into a reflection of shadows and fluorescent white. Malik glanced toward the windows. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not fear, something closer to disappointment. Then his eyes returned to Claire. She expected him to defend himself. Most people would have. Most people would have demanded fairness, demanded evidence, demanded a chance to explain. But Malik said nothing. The silence stretched. One nurse lowered her gaze. A receptionist pretended to focus on her computer screen. Even the security officers seemed reluctant to move. Finally, Malik adjusted his grip on the toolbox and started walking toward the doors. Slow, steady, unhurried. The automatic doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Cool air swept inside. Rain scented the lobby. Just before stepping outside, he stopped. Not because security touched him. Not because someone called his name. He stopped because something behind him caught his attention. A framed photograph hanging near the reception desk. It showed St. Andrew Medical Center during its grand reopening 5 years earlier. Doctors smiling. Staff celebrating. Volunteers gathered together. Malik was in that picture. Standing near the edge. Almost invisible, yet somehow still there. He looked at it for only a second. Then he walked out into the rain. Claire watched the doors close behind him. The lobby slowly returned to motion. Conversations resumed. Phones rang again. Computers clicked. Life moved forward. But something felt different. He hadn't argued. He hadn't begged. He hadn't even tried to defend himself. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that unsettled Claire more than if he had shouted. Outside, rain fell steadily across the parking lot. Malik crossed the wet pavement alone. Water darkened the shoulders of his work jacket. His curls glistened beneath the cloudy sky. In the distance, an ambulance siren echoed through downtown Chicago. He reached his aging pickup truck and placed the toolbox inside. For several moments, he simply stood there. The rain gathered on the windshield. The city blurred beyond it. Then slowly, Malik rested one hand against the truck door and lowered his head. Not in defeat. Not in shame. More like a man carrying a weight nobody else could see. Back inside the hospital, Claire turned away from the entrance. She told herself she had done the right thing. She told herself leadership required difficult decisions. She told herself the investigation would reveal the truth soon enough. Yet as she walked toward the executive elevators, one image refused to leave her mind. Malik's eyes. Not angry, not bitter, just tired, as if he already knew something she didn't. And 3 days later, Claire Bennett would discover that removing Malik Carter from her hospital was the worst mistake of her entire life. The next morning, St. Andrew Medical Center looked exactly the same from the outside. The glass towers reflected the pale Chicago sunrise. The flags near the entrance stirred gently in the cold breeze. Ambulances arrived. Nurses hurried through automatic doors carrying coffee cups. Visitors checked their phones while waiting for elevators. Everything appeared normal. But inside, something was missing. By 7 o'clock, several maintenance requests had already started piling up. A flickering light in the pediatric wing. A malfunctioning automatic door near radiology. A wheelchair charging station that refused to power on. Small problems. Ordinary problems. The kind of problems most people never noticed until they disrupted someone's day. Normally, Malik Carter would have handled half of them before breakfast. He had always been that way. Quiet. Reliable. Easy to overlook until he was gone. 6 miles away, Malik sat alone in a modest apartment above a family-owned hardware store. Morning sunlight filtered through worn blinds and stretched across the hardwood floor. A half-finished cup of coffee rested beside him. The steam had disappeared long ago. His maintenance uniform hung neatly on a chair near the window. Clean. Pressed. Ready for a shift that would never come. The apartment was simple. No expensive furniture. No luxury decorations. Just a bookshelf, a couch, a small kitchen table, and framed photographs that carried more value than anything money could buy. One photo showed a younger Malik standing beside his mother outside a church in South Carolina. Another captured a neighborhood basketball game from years ago. A third showed him smiling beside a group of hospital volunteers during a winter charity drive. He looked at that photograph longer than the others. Then he carefully set it face down. The room remained silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Malik pressed a hand against his chest for a moment. The gesture was small, almost automatic. By now it had become a habit. A secret routine he never discussed with anyone. A reminder of something doctors had been monitoring for nearly 2 years. He lowered his hand and exhaled slowly. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled through the street below. Life continued. It always did. His phone buzzed on the table. One message appeared. Then another. Then 3 more. Friends from the hospital. Co-workers. People asking questions. Offering support. Telling him the investigation would clear everything up. Malik read each message. He appreciated them. But he answered none. He simply locked the screen and placed the phone face down beside the coffee cup. Across the city, Claire Bennett stepped into a conference room on the 12th floor. The room smelled faintly of fresh paper and expensive coffee. Lawyers sat around the polished table reviewing reports. Department heads exchanged nervous looks. Nobody wanted to be associated with the growing controversy. Claire listened carefully as updates were presented. Maintenance logs. Security records. Staff interviews. Pages and pages of information. Yet the deeper they looked, the less certain everything seemed. Small inconsistencies began appearing. Missing timestamps. Contradictory statements. Details that refused to fit together. Claire noticed them immediately. She had built her career by noticing details. Still, she pushed the feeling aside. The evidence would reveal the truth eventually. At least that was what she kept telling herself. Later that afternoon, an elderly volunteer stopped Claire near the hospital chapel. Mrs. Rodriguez had worked there for nearly 15 years. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back. Her eyes carried the calm wisdom that came from seeing thousands of families pass through moments of joy and heartbreak. "I heard about Malik," she said quietly. Claire nodded. "The investigation is ongoing." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "That young man used to come here every Thursday after his shift." Claire looked surprised. "The chapel?" "Every Thursday," the woman replied. "He would sit in the last row for 15 minutes before going home." Claire frowned. "Why?" The volunteer offered a sad smile. He said it reminded him that people deserve grace before judgment. The words lingered long after the conversation ended. That evening, as sunlight faded beyond the hospital windows, Claire found herself staring at an empty maintenance request dashboard. For years, tasks had disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. Today they remained. Waiting. Unfinished. She looked toward the city skyline, glowing beneath the orange horizon, and felt a strange heaviness settle inside her chest. Not guilt. Not yet. Just the uncomfortable feeling that an important piece of the story was still missing. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, Malik Carter seemed to know exactly what that missing piece was. The following morning arrived under a blanket of low gray clouds. Chicago looked colder than usual, the kind of morning where the wind slipped through coat sleeves and turned every breath into a thin ribbon of fog. Claire Bennett stood alone inside her office before sunrise, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Normally, she loved this view. It reminded her how far she had come. The skyline represented ambition, discipline, success. Today it felt distant. Her desk was covered with reports, maintenance logs, security summaries, internal emails. Yet none of them answered the question that had started growing inside her mind. Why had Malik never tried to defend himself? Most employees fought accusations immediately. They called attorneys. They demanded meetings. They protected their reputations. Malik had simply walked away. Claire sat down and opened another file. The timestamp records from the restricted wing were spread across several pages. She studied them carefully. A small detail caught her attention. Then another. Neither proved anything by itself, but together they created a faint crack in the story everyone had accepted. Her phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of her father. Richard Bennett rarely called during business hours. Claire answered immediately. His voice sounded stronger than it had weeks ago. Recovery was finally going well. That should have made her happy. Instead, she found herself distracted. After a few minutes, her father paused. "You sound tired," he said. Claire glanced at the reports scattered across her desk. "It has been a difficult week." Richard was quiet for a moment. "That young maintenance worker. The one everyone is talking about. Malik, right?" Claire straightened slightly. "Yes. He helped me once." The statement surprised her. "When?" "Last winter." Richard's voice softened. "The elevator near cardiology stopped working. I was still weak after treatment. I remember feeling embarrassed because I could barely walk 50 feet without resting. Malik stayed with me nearly 30 minutes. He never made me feel like a burden." Claire stared at the window. She had never heard this story. "Why did you never mention it?" she asked. Her father chuckled quietly. "Because he never mentioned it either." The line went silent again. After they ended the call, Claire remained motionless. Outside, traffic crawled through wet streets below. Inside the hospital, another busy day had already begun. Nurses moved through corridors. Doctors reviewed charts. Families waited beside patient rooms. Life continued forward. Yet more stories kept surfacing. Around noon, a pediatric nurse mentioned that Malik bought winter coats every December for children whose families could not afford them. An administrator recalled seeing him stay 3 hours after his shift ended to help an elderly visitor locate a missing wedding ring. A volunteer remembered that he spent weekends repairing wheelchair ramps throughout underserved neighborhoods. None of these stories appeared in employee evaluations. None of them existed inside official records. They lived only in the memories of people he had quietly helped. By late afternoon, Claire felt as though she was discovering a completely different person than the one described in the investigation reports. The contrast unsettled her. Numbers and accusations painted one picture. Human beings painted another. As evening settled over the city, she walked through the maintenance department for the first time in months. The space felt strangely empty. Tool cabinets lined the walls. Work schedules hung from clipboards. A coffee mug sat untouched beside a workstation. One of the technicians noticed her looking around. "That was Malik's station," he said. Claire glanced toward the desk. Everything was organized with almost impossible precision. Pens aligned neatly. Manuals stacked by size. Notepads labeled in careful handwriting. She picked up one of the notebooks. Most pages contained routine maintenance reminders. Then she reached the final written entry. The handwriting remained steady and deliberate. It read, "People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you fixed." Claire stared at the sentence. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rolled across polished tile. The hospital carried on around her. But for the first time since Malik had left, a feeling she could no longer ignore settled into her chest. The investigation was no longer the only thing she needed to understand. She needed to understand the man himself. And she was beginning to fear that she should have done that long before he walked out those doors. The next day began with rain. Thin streams of water slid down the hospital windows, turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of silver and gray. Claire Bennett arrived earlier than usual, carrying a folder that had grown thicker with every new report she reviewed. She stepped into the investigation room expecting routine updates. Instead, she found tension waiting for her. Two compliance officers sat across from a bank of monitors, their expressions unusually serious. One of them motioned toward the screen. "You need to see this." Claire set the folder down. Security footage filled the monitor. The timestamp displayed the night of the incident. She watched maintenance staff moving through the restricted wing. Nurses passed by. Equipment carts rolled through hallways. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then the footage slowed. The compliance officer enlarged a section of the screen. Claire leaned closer. A man entered an electrical control room nearly 40 minutes before the equipment failure occurred. He was not part of the maintenance department. Claire frowned. "Who was that?" The officer exchanged a glance with his colleague. "We are still confirming, but it appears to be Victor Hale." Claire felt her stomach tighten. Victor Hale was a senior facilities manager. 20 years with the hospital. Trusted by executives. Respected by the board. The officer clicked to another camera angle. Victor appeared again. This time carrying a keycard he was not authorized to possess. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of electronics. Claire watched the footage twice. Then a third time. Each viewing made the same question louder. Why had nobody seen this before? By mid-morning, additional records started arriving. Access logs. Security audits. Equipment reports. Piece by piece, the timeline shifted. The narrative that had pointed toward Malik Carter began unraveling. Every new document created another gap, another inconsistency, another reason to doubt the conclusions that had been reached so quickly. Claire walked out of the investigation office and into the corridor. The hospital suddenly felt different. The polished floors, the bright overhead lights, the steady rhythm of footsteps. 3 days earlier, she had moved through these same hallways with certainty. Now certainty was gone. In its place sat a growing sense of unease. She stopped outside a patient waiting area. Families sat quietly beneath warm lighting. A child colored pictures at a small table. An elderly couple held hands near the window. The scene reminded her why the hospital existed in the first place. People trusted them. People depended on them. That trust required fairness. And fairness required truth. Her phone buzzed. A message from the lead investigator appeared on the screen. "We need an emergency meeting at 1 o'clock. New evidence changes everything." Claire stared at the message for several seconds before slipping the phone back into her pocket. Across town, Malik sat inside a small neighborhood diner. Rain tapped gently against the glass. The smell of coffee and fresh biscuits filled the air. He occupied the same corner booth he often visited after difficult days. The waitress knew him by name. She brought his coffee without asking. "You doing okay, honey?" she asked softly. Malik smiled politely. "I am getting there." She nodded, somehow sensing he preferred silence. On the table beside him rested a folded medical envelope. The edges were worn from being handled too often. He glanced at it briefly before looking away. Outside, traffic lights reflected across wet pavement. Inside, he seemed peaceful. Not because life was easy, not because circumstances were fair, but because he had already accepted something most people spent years fighting. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the emergency meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Executives filled the conference room. Attorneys reviewed evidence. Investigators presented findings. By the end, nobody disputed the conclusion. Malik Carter had not caused the failure. He had not violated protocol. He had not been responsible for the incident that had damaged his reputation. The room remained silent after the final slide disappeared. Claire looked around the table. Some executives avoided eye contact. Others studied their notes. Nobody seemed eager to speak first. Finally, the lead investigator cleared his throat. "There is one more thing." He displayed another report. A maintenance response log from the same night. Claire read the first line and felt her breath catch. While others had been searching for the source of the problem, Malik had been moving through multiple hospital floors helping staff relocate vulnerable patients and restore temporary systems. He had spent hours protecting hospital operations during the crisis, not causing it, helping solve it. The realization settled over the room like a weight. Claire lowered her eyes toward the report. For the first time since this ordeal began, she could no longer hide behind uncertainty. The facts were clear now. They had blamed the wrong man. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered streets of Chicago, that man was carrying the consequences alone. That night, the rain finally stopped. Chicago settled beneath a blanket of cold silence, the streets shining beneath rows of amber streetlights. Inside her office, Claire Bennett remained alone long after the rest of the executive floor had emptied. The investigation reports sat open across her desk, but she was no longer reading them. She already knew the truth. The facts had been verified. The evidence had been reviewed. Malik Carter had done nothing wrong. Yet the knowledge brought no relief. It only left behind a hollow feeling she could not ignore. She stood and walked toward the window. Far below, traffic moved through the city like streams of light. Somewhere out there, Malik was trying to rebuild a life she had helped unravel. The thought followed her all evening. Near midnight, she opened the hospital personnel system and searched his employee file. Hundreds of names existed in the database, but somehow his seemed different now. The photograph attached to his profile showed the same calm expression everyone remembered. Professional, kind, unassuming. Beneath the image were years of performance reviews. Outstanding reliability. Exceptional teamwork. Consistently exceeds expectations. Claire scrolled through page after page. The praise never changed. Then she reached a section she had never noticed before. Employee commendations. Patients. Families. Volunteers. Co-workers. Hundreds of messages. A mother thanking him for helping carry supplies to her son's room during a snowstorm. A retired teacher grateful for his weekly visits while recovering from surgery. A nurse describing how Malik stayed late to help a frightened family find temporary lodging after a medical emergency. The messages continued for years. Quiet acts of kindness scattered throughout thousands of ordinary days. Claire sat back slowly. The room felt smaller than before. She realized she knew almost everything about hospital operations and almost nothing about the man she had judged. Meanwhile, across town, Malik sat alone inside his apartment. A small lamp cast warm light across the living room. The medical envelope remained on the table beside him. This time he opened it. Several pages slid out. Test results. Appointment summaries. Specialist recommendations. His eyes moved across familiar words. Terms he had learned months ago. Terms he rarely discussed. The doctors had been honest from the beginning. His heart condition was progressing faster than expected. Treatment could help. Time could help. But neither was guaranteed. Malik folded the papers carefully and returned them to the envelope. He showed no anger. No bitterness. Only exhaustion. Losing his job had not simply cost him a paycheck. It had cost him stability at the exact moment he needed it most. Yet even now, his thoughts were not focused on himself. His gaze drifted toward a handwritten card sitting near the bookshelf. It had come from a young patient he met years earlier. The front showed a crayon drawing of a superhero carrying a toolbox. Inside, the child had written 5 simple words. "Thank you for helping everybody." Malik smiled faintly. Then he closed his eyes. Back at the hospital, Claire could not sleep. By 2 in the morning, she found herself walking through nearly empty corridors. The building felt different at night. Quieter. More honest somehow. The bright daytime energy was gone. In its place remained the steady rhythm of distant monitors and soft footsteps from overnight staff. As she passed the cardiology wing, a familiar voice stopped her. "You are looking for answers." Claire turned. Mrs. Rodriguez sat near the chapel entrance, organizing volunteer paperwork. Claire managed a tired smile. "Maybe." The older woman studied her gently. "Sometimes answers arrive too late to change what happened." Claire lowered her eyes. The words struck harder than she expected. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "But they can still change who you become afterward." Neither woman spoke for several seconds. The hospital lights reflected softly across polished floors. Somewhere down the hallway, an elevator chimed. Claire looked toward the chapel doors. For the first time since Malik had walked away, she allowed herself to acknowledge something she had been avoiding. The investigation was over. The truth was clear. The real challenge was only beginning. Because clearing his name would be easy compared to earning back the trust she had broken. And deep inside, she feared that every hour passing through the city night was carrying him farther beyond her reach. The following afternoon arrived wrapped in pale winter sunlight. For the first time in days, the clouds had broken apart, allowing thin beams of gold to spill across the city. Claire Bennett sat alone in her office, staring at a name written on a yellow notepad. Malik Carter. It seemed impossible that a person could work inside the same building for 6 years and remain almost invisible to the people making decisions above him. Yet that was exactly what had happened. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant stepped inside carrying a thin folder. "You asked for everything Human Resources had on him." Claire accepted it immediately. The folder was surprisingly small. Employment records, emergency contacts, benefit information, training certifications. Nothing unusual. Then she reached the final page. Her eyes stopped. Cardiology specialist program. Multiple appointments over the past 2 years. Claire read the line twice. Then a third time. The room suddenly felt very quiet. She picked up the phone and called the Human Resources director. 10 minutes later, she was sitting across from him in a private office. The director hesitated before speaking. "The information is confidential, but given everything that has happened, there are details you should understand." Claire listened carefully. Malik had been managing a serious heart condition. He rarely discussed it. He never asked for special treatment. He continued working full schedules even when doctors recommended reducing physical strain. The director shook his head slowly. Most people here never knew. He did not want sympathy. He said other people were carrying heavier burdens than his. Claire lowered her eyes. The words landed heavily. She remembered the countless stories people had shared over the past several days. The winter coats, the volunteer work, the extra shifts, the families he helped. All of it suddenly carried a different meaning. He had been giving pieces of himself away while quietly fighting a battle nobody could see. Later that evening, Claire drove across the city. She followed addresses collected from employee records, volunteer organizations, and community contacts. At every stop, she learned something new. A church pastor described Malik repairing broken heaters before winter storms. A community center director explained how he taught basic electrical skills to teenagers every Saturday morning. An elderly woman smiled through tears while showing Claire a wheelchair ramp Malik had built for her late husband. None of these people spoke about him as an employee. They spoke about him as family. As darkness settled across the city, Claire parked beside Lake Michigan. The shoreline was quiet except for distant traffic and the rhythmic sound of water moving against stone. She sat in her car watching lights shimmer across the surface. The cold glass pressed against her forehead. For days she had focused on clearing his name. Now that seemed far too small. A public correction would not erase humiliation. A formal statement would not restore lost trust. And an apology could never return the days he spent carrying consequences he did not deserve. Her phone vibrated unexpectedly. It was her father. Richard Bennett sounded unusually emotional. "Claire," he said softly, "there is something I never told you." She sat upright. "What is it?" A long pause followed. Then he spoke. "The night I had my cardiac emergency 6 months ago, the first person who reached me was Malik." Claire closed her eyes. Richard continued. "The weather was terrible. Elevators were delayed. Staff were stretched thin. He stayed with me the entire time. He kept talking, kept me calm, kept me focused until help arrived." Another pause. "I always wanted to thank him properly." Claire looked out across the dark water. The city lights blurred slightly. "Did you ever get the chance?" she whispered. Her father answered quietly. "No. I thought there would always be more time." The words lingered long after the call ended. And for the first time, Claire began to fear that she might be making the exact same mistake. The next morning, Claire Bennett arrived at the hospital carrying a determination that felt heavier than exhaustion. The sun had finally returned, washing the city in pale winter light, but the brightness did little to ease the weight in her chest. Before she reached her office, her phone rang. It was the lead investigator. His voice sounded urgent. "We found something else." 20 minutes later, Claire sat inside the conference room once again. New documents covered the table. Bank records, internal communications, access reports. This time the picture was complete. Victor Hale had not merely entered the restricted control room. He had intentionally bypassed safety procedures to conceal a series of maintenance budget violations that stretched back nearly 3 years. Millions of dollars had been redirected toward executive performance targets, while critical infrastructure repairs were repeatedly postponed. The failure that triggered the crisis had been building for months. Malik had discovered irregularities weeks earlier. He had documented concerns, submitted reports, requested inspections. Every warning existed in writing. Claire stared at the pages in disbelief. "He tried to stop it?" she asked quietly. The investigator nodded. multiple times. Another file slid across the table. Claire opened it slowly. Inside were copies of emails Malik had sent to supervisors. Professional, respectful, detailed. He had never accused anyone, never demanded attention. He simply asked that potential risks be reviewed before someone got hurt. Every message had been ignored. The room fell silent. Claire could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. She realized the truth was even worse than she imagined. Malik had not only been innocent, he had been the one person trying to prevent the entire disaster. By afternoon, emergency board meetings were underway. Lawyers prepared public statements. Executives scrambled to contain reputational damage. Victor Hale's employment was terminated immediately. Internal investigations expanded. News organizations began requesting comments. Yet none of it felt important to Claire anymore. Every official action arrived days too late. She spent the remainder of the afternoon searching for Malik. Calls went unanswered. Emails received no response. Former co-workers had not seen him. Community organizations had not heard from him in days. It was as though he had quietly stepped out of the city's spotlight and disappeared into the background once again. Just before sunset, Claire visited his apartment building. The owner of the hardware store downstairs recognized his photograph immediately. The older man sighed heavily. "Good man," he said. "One of the best." Claire felt a small surge of hope. "Is he upstairs?" The man shook his head. "Moved out 3 days ago." Her heart sank. "Do you know where he went?" The owner hesitated before answering. Only that he had more medical appointments lately. Looked tired. Real tired. Claire thanked him and stepped back onto the sidewalk. The evening air felt colder than before. Across the street, headlights reflected across wet pavement left behind by melting snow. She stood there for several moments, unsure where to go next. Then her phone vibrated. A message from her father appeared. "Call me when you can. It is important." Claire dialed immediately. Richard Bennett answered on the first ring. His voice sounded emotional. "I finally remembered where I met Malik before the hospital." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" A long pause followed. 3 years ago, after my first heart procedure, I collapsed outside a pharmacy during a snowstorm. A stranger stayed with me until paramedics arrived. I never got his name." Claire felt her breath catch. She already knew where the story was going. It was him, wasn't it? Her father exhaled slowly. "Yes." Silence filled the line. Richard continued softly. "I recognized him from a photograph this morning." Claire closed her eyes. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Long before Malik worked his way into the lives of hospital staff, long before he became a trusted employee, he had quietly helped people expecting nothing in return. Her father spoke again. "Some people spend their lives asking what they can receive from the world." His voice cracked slightly. "Men like Malik spend their lives asking what they can give." After the call ended, Claire remained standing beneath the fading evening sky. The city lights flickered to life around her. Somewhere beyond those streets, Malik was facing challenges far greater than the accusations that had followed him. And for the first time, Claire realized the race was no longer about finding the truth. The truth had already been found. Now it was a race against time itself. Claire spent the next 2 days searching every lead she could find. The city felt larger than ever. Every address seemed to produce another dead end. Every phone call ended with uncertainty. A volunteer center had not seen Malik in over a week. A church pantry said he stopped coming after his last medical appointment. Former co-workers shared worried expressions, but no answers. The deeper she searched, the more she realized how quietly he had lived. He had touched countless lives, yet left almost no trail behind for himself. On the third morning, a breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. Mrs. Rodriguez called just after sunrise. Her voice trembled slightly. "Claire, I think I found him." 20 minutes later, Claire was driving through the northern edge of the city. Winter sunlight stretched across frozen sidewalks. Bare tree branches swayed gently against a pale blue sky. The address led to a small nonprofit care facility overlooking a quiet lake. The building was modest, clean, peaceful, nothing like the towering medical center where they had first crossed paths. Claire parked and sat motionless behind the steering wheel. Her hands felt cold despite the heater running. For several seconds, she simply stared at the entrance. The reality of what she might find finally settled upon her. Then she stepped outside. Inside the facility, everything moved at a slower pace. Soft music drifted through the hallways. Large windows welcomed natural light. Nurses spoke in calm voices. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh linens. At the reception desk, Claire introduced herself. The nurse recognized the name immediately. A look of understanding crossed her face. "You are from the hospital." Claire nodded quietly. The nurse hesitated before speaking. "He does not talk much about what happened." Shame tightened in Claire's chest. "How is he?" The nurse lowered her eyes briefly. "Some days are better than others." A few moments later, Claire followed her down a sunlit hallway. The floors reflected soft morning light. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath a cold breeze. Everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. They stopped beside an open doorway. Claire's breath caught. Malik sat near the window in a comfortable chair. A blanket rested across his knees. A book lay open in his lap. Sunlight touched one side of his face. He looked thinner than she remembered, more tired. Yet somehow the calmness remained. The same quiet strength. The same steady presence. For several seconds he did not notice her. He was watching the lake, watching sunlight dance across the water. Then he turned slightly. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The silence stretched between them. Months of assumptions. Days of regret. Countless unspoken thoughts. All contained inside one quiet moment. Claire felt tears gathering before she could stop them. Malik. His expression softened gently. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Simply recognition. "Hello, Claire." Hearing her name in his voice made everything harder. She stepped closer. "I was wrong." The words emerged immediately. No preparation. No rehearsed speech. Just truth. "The investigation is finished. Everyone knows what really happened. Your name has been cleared. Victor Hale was responsible. We know about the warnings. We know you tried to stop everything." Malik listened quietly. The winter sunlight remained steady across the floor. Finally he nodded. "I heard." Claire blinked. "You heard?" A faint smile appeared. News travels fast. The simplicity of the answer nearly broke her. She had spent days chasing the truth while he had already moved beyond it. Her voice trembled. "I am so sorry." Malik looked toward the lake again. The water shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. "I know you are." There was no accusation in his voice. No resentment. Only honesty. Somehow, that hurt more than anger ever could. Claire lowered her head. For the first time in her life, she realized forgiveness and healing were not always the same thing. And sitting beside that bright window, with sunlight filling the room and silence settling gently around them, she began to understand just how much had been lost. The days that followed moved quietly. Claire visited the care facility whenever her schedule allowed. Sometimes they spoke for an hour. Sometimes only a few minutes. Often they simply sat beside the window and watched the lake. Winter slowly began surrendering to spring. The ice along the shoreline disappeared. Small patches of green returned to the trees. Life continued its steady march forward. One afternoon, Claire arrived carrying a thick folder. She placed it gently on the table beside Malik. Inside was a formal statement from the hospital board. His name had been fully cleared. Every record had been corrected. The hospital had created a community outreach program in his honor. Scholarships were being funded for young people entering skilled trades. Volunteer initiatives were expanding throughout the city. Claire watched him read the documents. When he finished, he smiled softly. "That is good," he said. "People will benefit." She laughed through tears. Most people would be focused on themselves right now. Malik closed the folder. Sunlight reflected across the lake behind him. "Most people help me become who I am. It only makes sense to give something back." Claire lowered her eyes. Even now, after everything, he remained exactly who everyone had described. Kind, humble, steady. The qualities she should have recognized from the beginning. A few weeks later, Richard Bennett visited the facility. The older man walked slowly but confidently. When he reached Malik's chair, neither man spoke immediately. Richard simply extended his hand. Malik shook it. The silence carried more meaning than words. Finally, Richard smiled. "Thank you." Malik nodded. "You already said that." Richard's eyes glistened slightly. "Then I will keep saying it." Outside the window, sunlight danced across the water. Inside the room, peace settled gently between them. As spring deepened, Malik's strength gradually faded. The nurses noticed it first, then the doctors, then everyone else. Yet he never complained. He never asked why. He spent his remaining energy writing letters. Some went to former co-workers, others to children he had mentored. A few were addressed to complete strangers whose lives had crossed his path for only a moment. Claire helped mail everyone. On a warm morning in late April, she arrived carrying coffee from the diner he used to visit. The chair by the window was empty. For a second she froze. Then she noticed the nurse standing nearby. Her expression said everything. The room remained peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the glass. The lake shimmered beneath a gentle breeze. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just stillness. Claire stepped slowly toward the window. A folded envelope rested on the table. Her name was written on the front in familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a short note. Claire, thank you for searching for the truth when it mattered. Do not spend your life carrying regret. Use it to become better. Help people feel seen. Sometimes that changes everything. Malik. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She read the letter again. Then once more. Outside, a pair of birds crossed the bright sky above the water. Weeks later, the hospital dedicated the new outreach center. Reporters attended. Board members gave speeches. Community leaders gathered beneath banners carrying Malik's name. Yet the moment Claire remembered most happened after everyone left. The building stood empty. Evening sunlight stretched across the polished floor. Near the entrance sat a framed photograph of Malik smiling beside a group of volunteers. Claire paused in front of it. Around her, the hospital continued its endless rhythm. Elevators moved. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Life went on. She touched the edge of the frame gently. Then she looked toward the busy corridors beyond. For the first time in a very long time, she understood what mattered most. Not status. Not reputation. Not power. People. The people others overlook. The people carrying burdens nobody sees. The people who quietly make the world better. The evening light settled softly across the floor. Somewhere beyond the windows, the city glowed beneath a fading sunset. And in the silence that followed, Malik's absence felt enormous. Yet so did the goodness he left behind.